Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Honeycutt, and I lead learning and development efforts here at the 4As. Some of you are probably familiar with my colleague Shelley Campbell, who's on a well-deserved vacation day today, so I'm filling in. So happy to welcome you here today in our newly launched Talent Leadership Series. And today's topic is the science of women in leadership. I'm so pleased to welcome our thought leaders, Renetta McCann, Chief Talent Officer at Leo Burnett, who is here with Dr. Lauren Tucker, Strategic Performance Innovator, for a discussion about Dr. Tucker's, or Lauren's, career journey from planner to leader in the decision science field. In this session, Lauren will provide invaluable insights into how to broaden skill sets and create opportunities for the next generation of talent to thrive. Before we get started, I just wanted to review a couple of really quick logistics with you. If you've taken our webinars before, you know the drill. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you've got any problems viewing the presentation on your computer or hearing the presentation, it could be a security issue on your end, and you may need to contact your IT team for help. If you need to contact us via email, please send that email to webinar@aaaa.org, and we'll help you if you have any technical issues. And if you disconnect for any reason, just go back to the email invitation and log in again. As mentioned before, our webinar leaders today are Renetta McCann and Dr. Lauren Tucker. Renetta has been recognized as one of the leading innovators and most influential executives in the advertising, marketing, and media industries, with a global reputation for not only building brands, but also for the organizations and leadership to sustain them. As Chief Talent Officer at Leo Burnett, she heads up the agency's People and Cultural Department. Renetta plays a key role in ensuring that the company retains, attracts, and arms the best and brightest minds in business today, with oversight of the agency's U.S. recruitment, training, benefits, and talent management. Dr. Tucker is a marketing thinker and doer. She has deep experience in business and marketing strategy, combined with a long and varied history of creating compelling customer experiences at agencies like Leo Burnett, the Martin Agency, and Varel Communications. For 25 years, Dr. Tucker's innovative, data-savvy approach to marketing has helped some of the most storied companies in the world successfully close the gap between business imperatives and marketing execution. Companies like Kellogg, Kraft, Bacardi, Penske, B.F. Goodrich have relied on her to navigate an increasingly dynamic marketing marketplace. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a few minutes for questions. However, if you have a question and you think of one during the broadcast, please feel free to send it to us in the chat box or via email to that webinar email address. But the chat box is probably a little bit more effective, so if you look at your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, just type your question in the chat window and we can take it from there. And we want the session to be as engaging as possible, so we'll be asking you some questions along the way and we'd love for you to chime in. We're going to be launching a poll, so keep an eye out for that coming your way later in the presentation. And lastly, we encourage all of you to live tweet during the webinar using the hashtag 4As webinars and the @4As Learning Twitter handle. And now please welcome Renetta and Lauren.
Good afternoon. Hope you guys are all well. And Lauren and I are very glad that we could join with you today to talk about this topic. And Laura, thank you for that very warm introduction for both of us. Lauren and I, as we collaborated on this project, decided to hone in a little bit on the word science. One is because what we know is that academic researchers are learning a lot more about human behavior in our workplaces today, and a number of our comments or suggestions will rely on those learnings. There are a number of factors that are affecting women in the workplace, and by using the word science, we want to make sure that those issues are receiving the same review and rigor that we would hope. Lauren is a data scientist. It's a growing discipline and capability in our field, and so she has a lot of great thoughts on how that has influenced our industry and what that could mean for women. And quite frankly, we use the word science because we just want to advance this topic in general. So actually, we're going to start off with our first poll right now. And what we'd like to know is, what does the hiring process look like for your company?
Yeah, so basically we have two choices here. You know, a guy in a kayak riding the rapids, and we have on the other hand, on B, a set of gears. They look exactly like what they look like. It's kind of a little bit slower, cranking it out, perhaps even suggestive of some gridlock. Let us know, what does the hiring process look like for your company? We're just going to take a few seconds to see what answers we get.
Okay, it looks like the answers are coming along, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Now, if some of you said A, you know, things happen quite quickly and dynamically. In fact, oh my goodness, 80% of you said A. All right. And a lot of times this kind of dynamic really does not work for diversity and inclusion, does not work for getting to know people, especially folks that typically aren't part of the inner circle of the hiring managers. And so this makes it really difficult. It makes it difficult because most of the recruiters and the folks in HR are really under the gun to get somebody in there quickly, and that does not always lead to really getting out there and getting to know people, especially women and minorities who are out there that have the kind of talent that you're looking for. If you said B, you're not necessarily in a whole lot better shape either, because the talent that you're looking for is moving fast. People are competing for this talent, and so they're not always going to be waiting around for the processes in your company to move forward. So we just wanted to get a little bit of an idea of kind of how hiring looked in your company, and we're not surprised that A is the dominant perspective.
Yep. So moving on.
Maybe you just. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So for the science of women in leadership, what we're going to try to give you this afternoon is an argument on why diversity still matters. And we'll look at it through the lens of women in our industry, but we've also taken into consideration that people of color face similar challenges in some ways. We want to talk about this topic in two ways. One is how companies can be more thoughtful in creating diverse and inclusive environments, and then how individuals, in fact, those of you who are on the webinar today, how you can make more thoughtful decisions as well. So I'm going to motor through this next chart because I think we're all pretty much aware of it. So why diversity and inclusion at all? What we know is that the places where our agencies are, the places where our firms are, the places where our clients' firms are incredibly diverse. The first chart shows diversity by size or population, and the larger the population, the more diverse. What we also know is that diversity in our mind, and we're talking about diversity in the broadest sense of it, also includes intergenerational kind of perspectives. So the fact that we have 4 generations in the workforce right now is another reason for diversity and inclusion mattering. What we know is that for the most part, diversity and inclusion leads to better financial returns and outcomes for companies, and this is important to us and our clients. And then lastly, what we know is that there's this continuum of activities that companies engage in, but for the most part, they're not always happy with where they turn out, or not always happy with the results. So we're looking at ways today and how we can improve the results in the types of companies that we work for. So the world of advertising today, I'll turn it over to Lauren if you want to take a...
Sure. So, when we look at advertising today, one of the things that is working against advertising, against the growth that we all desire, is the commoditization of the product itself. That's something that is actually a drag on the business, and what we're looking at right now is how can we put together different kinds of capabilities, and that means also different kinds of people, to make our product not just more distinctive, but, to be honest with you, much more useful and more broad-based in terms of how we think about what creativity is. It isn't just what an art director and a copywriter does. It's really putting together creative solutions that are going to drive our clients' businesses. And that requires a diversity of thought and a diversity of perspective, which brings us to the second piece. We have a lot of insight and idea deserts out there. It's getting harder to get to something that's going to make a difference, that's going to be competitively distinctive, that's going to fuel growth. And so we need as many different perspectives as possible to make that happen. Third, we have persistent stereotypes, and I would say that the most obvious ones I think we're actually doing a lot better job overcoming, and that's with what we're doing in the creative right now, what we consider to be the creative output. Again, the art direction, the copywriting, the content of the content of what we put out there. But I would argue that persistent stereotypes of what happens inside our culture of our companies continues to delimit the potential that people have and what they can offer. Again, representation, stagnation, the idea that really what we're doing is not moving beyond mid-career. There's just not enough diversity at the top where key decisions are being made. And as a result, we're not getting much farther than we were, quite frankly, when I started in this business 30 years ago. And then equity gaps in terms of what are we, how are we compensating our talent? How are we compensating them with opportunities? It isn't just about money and benefits, but it's opportunities as well, because it's the opportunities that for people to learn and develop skill sets that will take them to the next level.
And all of that gets framed against an industry that is as dynamic as probably it's ever been. So digital is in demand. When the Department of Labor looks at our industry, they see job growth over a 10-year period starting in 2014. There's certainly, in 2016, we saw an increase in client demand for diversity, so there's something on the client side as they think about their brands and their customers or consumers that's driving this. There's this whole notion of sustaining customer engagement. So even if we think about the spectrum of advertising, it's moving from advertising to engagement, and then data-driven insights. All of those forces are out there and putting demands on our industry to manage a different way. So when we get into it, what we really think is at stake is that the topic of diversity and inclusion, with a focus on women in particular, what's really at stake is our ability to compete effectively. It's about our ability to impact culture both within our firms and within our broader communities. And it's also about getting to better outcomes for our talent and from our talent. And one of the things that we think is really a deep underpinning on this page is if you look at where our tools, our technologies, the way we work today. We're in a far more connected world. And what that means is there's this now greater awareness of the social construction of what people do every day, the meaning that they bring to their work, the meaning that they take out of the work that we do, so the advertising that we place. And a lot of what's getting done today is based on how ideas are socialized. And if somewhere in that process there are voices, such as the voices of women that aren't being accounted for, or the voices of people of color that aren't being accounted for, when we think about the socialization of those ideas, we're going to face some severe limitations.
And before you move on, Renetta, I want to really talk about this issue of competing effectively in particular, because what we are seeing, Renetta talked about the growth in the industry, but this growth is going to be a pie that's going to be fought over by a lot more entities in the marketplace that do quote-unquote advertising, communications, marketing, etc. Now we're looking at not just kind of traditional or legacy advertising agencies. We're looking at management consulting companies that have gotten into this business and are hiring creative talent, are hiring talent that understands how to create tight customer experiences. We're also looking at competition from our clients. Our clients who do quite frankly a better job at diversity, hiring women, hiring people of color, they're creating their own in-house agencies because of the pace of the business. They need to have people that are on site that can consistently deliver compelling consumer experiences. So legacy agencies will lose out if we cannot compete effectively with these new entities that are in the mix. And they are also impacting culture. In fact, some of the best work, what's been designated as the best work last year was coming out of non-traditional, non-legacy agencies. And so this really has to be considered as we move forward, or we're going to find ourselves behind the pack.
Okay, so now we'd actually like you to take another poll. So the question this time is, which best describes your management's attitude towards your current diversity efforts? So as you think about your management, how would you describe their attitudes towards the current diversity efforts?
All right, I'm just going to give everybody a chance to absorb the emojis, and now I'm going to launch the poll. And we have responses coming in. It looks like we've got a few more to come in. I'm just going to give you a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, very interesting.
Wow. Well, it's good to know that no one's management is laughing outright at you. That's good. So A is off the table.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing that A is off the table, but B, that's kind of interesting as well, meaning they are scratching their heads about what to do. It also looks like there's some thumbs downs out there.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you add those two together, 2/3 of the responses were between B and C. So once again, it's good to know where you guys are, and those are some very interesting figures. And in fact, in the next section, I'll refer back to them. So one of the things as we think about all of this, and once again, this is now based on science. So Iris Bonet is a professor and author at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and she writes about the experiences of women in the workplace. and has her most recent book in 2012 did so. And for those of you who were able to, Harvard Business Review had a summer issue last year that talked about diversity and what was working and what wasn't working, and it was Iris Bonet's work that was featured in that. But what she says is, for beliefs to change, people's experiences have to change first. So as we're thinking about what we were going to talk to you about today, it really is through this frame of how to help people change their experiences. And moving on, and going back to that poll where 2/3 were between B and C, it really got Lauren and I thinking about this topic from two levels. One is, what can organizations do? And then Lauren will take us through what individuals can do. And the real deep part here is that all of our agencies probably have some form of diversity program. We may have diversity activities and trainings, but if you go into what the academic researchers and thinkers are working around, they really talk about what they call a diversity climate. And that is a shared belief that my company is fair in its talent practices and this is the important part, socially integrates underrepresented employees in the workplace. So when we go back now, it's this climate, it's this atmosphere. And that definition came from some work done by Herdman and McMillan Capehart in 2010. So they published a paper. And when you think about it, it's not just the programs or trainings, it's the policies, it's the practices, it's the procedures, it's the things that are very explicit in our environments, and it's the things that are very implicit in our environments. But once again, it creates this climate. So back to the poll, I think what I would say based on the responses is there is work to be done, not only at a program level, but at a climate level. And when we're talking about that climate level, what people tend to stitch together are practices and procedures towards representation, whether or not people get integrated into the flow of the informal networks that exist within the firm. How does the firm deal with bias? And does it go head on, or does it have an atmosphere where there really is what they'd call low cultural bias? Believe it or not, part of the dimensions that contribute to climate are all around whether the firm has a way of dealing with conflict, just not only at the team level and a day-to-day level, but at a relational level as well. And there are moments when conflict can be productive, and there's moments when conflict is not productive, but that's it. Another aspect of this climate is whether people fit in and how the firm helps you fit in. And finally, it's whether people who are there say, I think I belong here or not. And quite frankly, what we can learn from the literature, if you will, is that this climate overall is both an attractor, meaning people do use it as a factor in deciding to join our firms, but it's also a factor in turnover. So when they can't find the right climate, people sort of move on. And so going into that,
let me just add to that. I'm just going to jump in, Laura, because I think that I always like the word climate, using the word climate. And I would add something else. From an individual's perspective, you have to trust the climate. You have to. If you don't trust the climate, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people of color and women. Once they're on the job, the critical piece is, do they have trust in the climate? Do they have trust in the fact that their voices will be heard, that their career paths will be taken seriously, that there's actually a career path for them, and that they have people there that are not just cheerleading, but that are championing them through that pipeline. There's a reason why the pipeline leaks. And trust in the climate or a lack of trust in the climate is one of the key reasons.
Okay, so now getting into some things that we think organizations can do to improve the climate for women, improve the climate for diverse populations overall. We've got 5 ideas for you. And the first one is actually redefining equality and equity in any of our firms. And so just to be really literal, people define equality is around fairness, that everyone gets treated the same, and that equity is more about giving people what they need in order to be successful. And actually, if you think about it, we need both, but also if you think about it, the equity piece is a little bit harder, but at least in my mind, that's the true path to diversity for all people, all populations. So many of you may have seen this quite popular rendition of equality versus equity. So on the left you have the 3 people standing on boxes of equal sizes, and some of them can see over the fence and one of them can't. On the right side of your screen, equity says you would redistribute those boxes so that people can be successful. So when we talk about equity in the workplace for women, at least in my mind, we are talking about pay. We're talking about pipeline, which Lauren has mentioned. We're talking about advancement. We are talking about their abilities to move into leadership. And as we think about those paths to equity, it's really, once again, shaping that climate with a proactive, enthusiastic embrace of the characteristics, the qualities that make the workplace really rich for women. So that could be, if you go down the mother's path, it really is having a strong embrace of what it means to be a mother and making room for people to step out and come back in while they're here. It does mean mother's rooms. It means it means clearing the path so that women know and know pretty viscerally that the environment is being created to help manage their success. It could mean revising the pathways to promotion and leadership. It could mean moving some of the rocks in the road, and you don't have to move all the big rocks, you just have to acknowledge them. And what it can also mean inside of our firms is having open conversations around how the culture defines equity. And you're going to hear me come back at least one more time on those open conversations and transparency, because that's one of the keys to really having a climate that can work. If we move on, there are ways to just simply be more imaginative about how diversity activities and the climate is shaped. So the first thing I would say is I think it's adopting a mindset that says women or people of color or people with different lifestyles are not problems to be fixed. They are opportunities to be developed, and a lot of times because of the toughness of the topic of advancing underrepresented populations in the workplace, we tend to look at those people as the problem, and actually they're not. Another idea under this banner of being more imaginative is, what if we rotated the Chief Diversity Officer role, and maybe even its sponsorship, across senior leaders in the firm, especially white males? Last year, The Atlantic published a very sobering article that basically said, in today's times, a lot of women see the sponsorship and mentorship of males, white males, helping them get further in the corporation as opposed to other populations that they could select. So what if that role just rotated? Obviously, I think a lot of us are trying to do this. I would just say we need to double down and do it a little bit harder, which is actively go out and hire people who we know we don't know. They don't come from our next door neighbor. They don't come from a friend. They could be women on return ships. They could be women who've never been in the field of advertising, people of color who've never been in the field of advertising. I think what we need to do is just actively seek out different types of populations. We can create career and industry transition programs for mid to senior career people. I've seen it work successfully where you can go out into what you would call non-advertising industry and recruit very effective leaders who can help develop other leaders in the firm and help improve our product. I'm a big fan of creating solutions from the bottom up. So put actually this topic of women's advancement in the hands of junior talent. If nothing else, they will be able to shape the activities along the way as their careers mature. And once again, I'm going to come back to the point on transparency, and I'd say we would be well served to take a page from the playbook of the tech industry, which is really kind of rigorous around transparency and publishing their numbers, and you can find that on the pages of USA Today from time to time. We've heard it at the 3% conference. Once again, in the academic world, there's a woman named Hermine Ibarra who is at Harvard as well, and she spends a lot of time talking about women and how they form networks. And I think given the tools that are available to us today, so one, Hermine has her own tool for measuring network strength at the individual level, but there are other types of tools and techniques out there as well. What we need is for women to get into the center of strong networks where the who they know factor, in addition to what they know, can get activated and accelerated in much deeper ways. The next one is to focus on teams, and that, you know, I think that's going to sound natural, but it's something that we don't always do. A lot of diversity and inclusion is held either at the organization level or down at the individual level. It's that level of relationship. But if we think about how our work is done, it's done in teams every single day. So when I go back to the thinking on climate, it's, does that team leader visibly support diversity? Do you have ways of managing conflict inside of that team? Is the team being set up to be diverse in the first place? And I think if we could get to the heart of teams inside of our agencies, we could make a big dent in how women progress in the workplace. And last on this section is reviewing the work and insights differently. And so I think we're beginning to see more and more advertising that's taken on what I would call a societal responsibility stance. So we are naturally the stewards of our clients' brands and connections with their consumers, but what we also have to embrace is our role as stewards of societal imagery. So back to the cultural and gender stereotypes that exist out in the world. Maybe there need to be creative review processes where women from the agency just get invited in, or senior women, even if they had nothing to do with the work, in a way that allows those insights to get richened or deepened. Certainly when briefs are being written. And what makes this hard is that, you know, if some of these populations are truly underrepresented in your firm, you're going to have a hard time making this happen. So are there other unique ways? But one of the ways that we can signal to the people we want to attract to this industry that we really want them there or want them here with us is through our work and the way our work represents them. So those are just 5 ideas. Redefine equality and equity, be more imaginative, strengthen the networks and connections that women have inside the firms, focus on teams, and review the work and insights differently. And so now we're going to have our final poll for you, and Lauren will take you through this one.
So this poll is your agency's approach to change a cathedral or a bazaar? Is it top-down, delivered by the priests, highly structured, or is it a little bit more both bottom-up and top-down and around the edges? How much do you have an opportunity to really hear from all the varied people in your organization about how to approach change?
Okay, it looks like that was a quick answer, so I'm closing the poll right now.
Okay, so 100% say cathedral, and that is most unfortunate.
And you know what, so if I can jump in, even in this transition, if we think back to the comments in the prior section around diversity climate, what organizations can do, I would just represent that organizations that are more cathedral-like are going to have a harder time establishing those types of climates because the change or the experience base gets limited just to the people at the top, and it's really hard to cascade that through the agency or through the firm. So I would also add, I guess, to the list of the organizational things is looking at putting in more of the bazaar feel, if you will, into what they do.
Yeah, and I would also say, as we move forward in the presentation, I let Baron. She's a business futurist, an innovator, an entrepreneur. She's worked for years in the tech industry, specifically with Cisco, but has also run her own tech companies. And she talks about leading from the edge brings us into contact with a far wider range of relationships, and in turn, this increases our potential for diversity in terms of thought, experience, and background. Diversity leads to more disruptive thinking, faster change, and better outcomes. And one of my areas of focus these days is really helping people to get to ideas faster, ideas and innovation faster and better. And this is one of the leaders in that movement. Again, we talked about idea and insight deserts. But the critical piece here is we just live in a world that is extremely fast, dynamic, and moving. We talked about, what does your hiring process look like? And most everybody said it looks like the guy in the kayak. And so we have to really start to understand how to lead from the edges, how to make sure there's representation, leadership in the edges and throughout our organizations, in part because we don't have time for the processes that are aligned with being in a cathedral. So let me move on and talk about a little bit about what individuals can do to enhance this dynamic, and also just take responsibility for your own career. So we keep talking. You'll see on what we're talking about is really a new logic of thinking, both for organizations as well as individuals. And I'm a big believer in the need to put yourself in the path for opportunity. As a African American woman, the challenge for me in this industry, and for Renetta in this industry for as long as we've been in it, has been always there. The critical piece to, I think, our success is not necessarily waiting for some opportunity to knock on our door, but to make sure that we're intensively networking, using the connectivity that we now have that's technology enabled, to make sure we're placing ourselves in the path of opportunity. Because of the dynamics of the marketplace, we need to make sure that when hiring decisions are being made, we are right there. We already know the people that are making those decisions. Experience is good, but expertise is better. One of the things that is really required now that we have these new these new entrants into the market, or relatively new entrants into the market, is that a lot of management consulting firms, digital agencies that are becoming broader based, even direct marketing firms that are becoming more creatively focused, they all have people that have very specific types of expertise that's much more accommodating to the digital and data-driven world than than much of the talent in traditional legacy agencies. What's great about expertise is that it is what it is. You've either got it or you don't. Experience is really great, but having something, that's a hard skill that you can put forth on your resume and put forth to the hiring managers can make the difference and can make the competitive difference. And they're now being forced by their clients to look for that expertise. Deepen your equity and expand your relevance. This is what I like to call personal brand expansion. As you move through your career, not only build on those capabilities that you have, but now take those capabilities and start looking for ways to apply them in a variety of ways outside of what you've done in the past. This is not just about building transferable skills, but really making sure that hiring managers understand how to take those skills and help their clients grow and help their own agencies grow. So I think this is something that a lot of times people, especially and Renetta mentioned it, when you're either a person of color or you're a woman, a lot of times people will characterize you as the problem. You need the training, you need the job fair, you need the internship, etc. This is my response to that. This is the individual's response to that, and that is, not only am I not the problem, but I can take what I have done in the past and apply them in new and different ways that can help out my clients, help out my company, and help drive growth. The next piece is a piece of advice I got from my brother, actually, and that is, at the end of the day, there are going to be companies that get it and companies that don't. I'm a big believer in finding a champion in the company. Somebody's going to get in the game and help you win, help put opportunities on your plate that will give you a chance to reach your potential. There are a lot of cheerleaders that hope that you win. But the champion gets in the game and helps you win. If you cannot find those folks and you do not trust the climate, there's a point where you just have to buy the car and walk off the lot, and not waste your time waiting for somebody to help you through the pipeline and through the glass ceiling. At the end of the day, that feeds into my last piece of advice, and that is, you have to be your own champion. I think for many years I was waiting for somebody to be my champion, and then realized I have to do all of these things. Put yourself in the path of opportunity, build my expertise, expand my relevance, and sometimes walk off the lot, because I am in the game to win it, and no one is going to champion you like you're going to champion you.
So with that, we have gotten to the end of our comments. I think what you've heard are two women who have been longtime practitioners in this field try to come at this topic in some ways that will sound familiar but are underpinned with some differences. So really asking you as an agent within your firm to think about the climate that's being set, not just the programs and not just the specific activities, but what's the broader atmosphere that governs how your firm looks at the topic of diversity and inclusion, or if we want to just say underrepresented populations inside of our firms, and And back to something that I said earlier that was in that definition, which is your company trying to um, socialize and integrate those populations into the firm? I think it's really important. I think one of the steps, and from an organizational standpoint, there are a number of steps that can be taken. I will add on that I think in terms, back to networks and their development, there are a lot of writings out there that speak to women forming developmental networks where women at the same career junctures or same career tenures will get together just to share information and experience collectively. There's a great book out there called The Stiletto Network, which was written by a woman who works at the New York Times that talks specifically how you could form that kind of network. So I do think that there are things to do. And then, of course, I think Lauren gives us some very sage advice informed through the lens of somebody who's had to do all of those things. I think the last piece I'll mention to you is yesterday I was reading the New York Times, and there was, in the book review section, there are two books that came out that are talking about data and the impact of data, whether it leads to more artificial intelligence, whether it leads to the strengthening of the Internet of Things. But the thing that struck me in the reviewer's comments is that he said that both books had done a disservice to the topic because what both books ignored was the ways in which data was being used to either promote or, in his words, actually demote or ignore the impact of underrepresented populations. So the algorithms, the codes, the apps, the recognition features, what we're finding is that bias is being built into those things as well. Mm-hmm. And that, that's going to inform how we, consume information and how we share things. But if bias can be built into technology, which we think of as binary with just ones and zeros, then I would just say it was a reminder to me that the topic of diversity and inclusion, the forwarding of women in our workplaces, the forwarding of people of color in our workplaces are just really critical topics that we all have to stay on, because the drift towards bias or the soft underbelly of bias is always with us. With that, I will thank you once again. We will open it up for questions, and I will leave us on the last page because today's session is just one of 4, and there will be another one next Monday talking about getting past taboo, race in the workplace. So I think a very nice follow-on or coupling of these two sessions. And then at the end of the month, we'll have a session on unconscious bias beyond the training. So with that, we'd like to open it up to your questions.
Okay. If you have a question, please be sure to enter it into the chat module, the questions module over in your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We do have a question asking if there will be a copy of the recording of the webinar, and yes, that is available. So we'll be sure to get that link out to you, as well as a link for the presentation after the webinar has ended. Here is we have a question that has come in. What would be the #1 training you will do to improve the climate in your organization?
So I'll grab on to that. So I am in the camp of unconscious bias. I believe, we all have them. I certainly have mine. I think that's a reality, and I'm a proponent of it. What I am looking to layer on top of it, though, are more tools and techniques to get people into the space of self-awareness. Because part of the reason why our biases are unconscious is because we're not always aware of them. So getting back into some of the things we talked about today, there's a tool, and I'm not promoting the tool, but I'll just state it as it is factually. It's the Berlitz Cultural Navigator. So we think of the Berlitz School that teaches, languages to people who are going to go on expat assignments around the world. But what they've developed is an assessment tool that covers your thinking style, your interaction style, your sense of self. And it throws out answers on 17 dimensions, and I won't go into the dimensions. What is very interesting about the tool, though, is that on the back end, you can set it up so that an individual can compare themselves to a team of people. So if we now get back to, under organizational climate, the focus on the team, this is a tool that teams could use to say, how do people in our team respond differently to different inputs? So that could be good. The results could be projected at an agency level. So it would be very interesting, back to the notion of transparency. What does the agency look like, and how do I align? How am I similar or different than my agency? And then even I think it's really kind of interesting because all of us live in this global world. The Cultural Navigator tool that they have allows you as an individual to match yourself against 10 countries at a time. So you can see across cultures how you perform against those dimensions versus the generalized norm for those cultures. And so that's one of the tools I'm looking to bring into the agency under the umbrella of just simply raising people's awareness and giving people more language, more words, more insight in order to both explain who they are, share their identity, but also internally reflect and decide what their biases are.
I'd like to add to that too, something that I think is a simple, you talk about training, but I would say it's also simple tools of listening. Let's go back to, the cathedral versus the bazaar. I've sat in in my agency's management's conversations with their officers, some of whom have been women and people of color looking for opportunities somewhere else in the network. We tend to grab and hold on to those people in their jobs because hopefully they're doing a good job and we want them to stay, but sometimes we need to help them move on and up. Give them opportunities. Listen to, if they're asking to move to the New York office or to the San Francisco office, or there's a key opportunity somewhere else in the network, we can't ignore that because we'll ignore it to our own peril, and before you know it, those people are going elsewhere and they're leaving the company. I also think it's really important for kind of distributing the folks who are accountable for diversity and inclusion. Too often they're housed just in the C-suite, and I've talked to companies where you have 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 people, and they don't even know who their chief diversity and inclusion officer is. So I have a feeling that means they also don't understand the programs. They haven't really been exposed to a lot of the kinds of trainings that we have taken for granted. And so somehow we've got to find representation of that perspective throughout the networks that we're a part of as well.
Okay, here's another question. How do you deal with resistance to change?
Well, I would say that one's a tricky one, and I'm going to give you, I'll start with our favorite two words, which is it depends. It really depends on which kind of change it is. So I will try to ground it in this conversation and say, I've been fortunate to work for leaders who are ultimately committed to diversity and inclusion writ large. So both from a representation standpoint as well as a thinking and a lifestyle standpoint. And I would probably go as far to say if there is too much resistance to embracing diversity and inclusion at even a fundamental level, I would think that in that case it becomes career limiting, because what it means is that you can't help the agency or the firm get where it needs to go. So that's probably the hard edge of what I'd say about it. I think the way I like to deal with resistance to change is to apply techniques, and once again, it really depends on what we're talking about, but apply techniques where people can open up their frame, where people can try on new models of how the world is, or how the world could be, or how the topic is, or ways that this topic could be solved. Lauren and I have known each other for, quite some time now, and if you encounter us at lunch or just hanging out, we're always talking about solution-focused interventions, right? So even when you're dealing with resistance, it's not calling the person out for their resistance. It really is working with them to see where are they and how can we get them to move towards a solution that'll work for them and the firm. So I'd say that. Lauren,
yeah, and let me build on that. I'm working on a book right now called Do What Matters, and it's about, again, solution-focused logic. And I think the key to, first of all, let's just acknowledge that we have a culture here in this country where we tend to focus 80% of our efforts on the problem. We call it problem solving, but we do a lot of problem talk. And I think that a lot of the folks who tend to be resistant to change tend to feel that change is happening without them or despite them in some way.
Or even to them.
Or to them. And so I think it's really important to help them be the solution. Make sure that we are engaging in what I call solution talk versus problem talk, and getting them to be a part of the solution. Remember that movie Bruce Almighty, and at the end he talks about be the miracle. Well, I would translate into help them be the solution. And there are very specific techniques of solution talk that will help these folks not only accept change, but also help the organization navigate that change so that everybody can be a part of the solution. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't going to be some people, to Renetta's earlier comment, there are going to be some people that are just going to be recalcitrant. But I think what I have found is that the majority of people that are challenged by change just tend to believe it's going to happen without them, or it's going to happen to them, and they won't be a part of the process of change. And I think we have to change our logic of thinking and talking towards focusing 80% of that conversation on building solutions rather than addressing problems.
And so one last point on that, and for those of you, I don't know, how your agencies practice, but I have found great success with employing design thinking techniques inside the agency. So a lot of times your planners or strategists will have this, but it's getting people to work from a hypothesis and then go do some research, usually ethnographies, talking to people, personal interviewing, empathy-based techniques, and then prototyping or working through the solution. So I think people's resistance can also be managed by helping them helping them see that they can find multiple possible solutions to any whatever that trigger for resistance is, and then being part of the solutions that work it through. So I think employing or adapting design thinking skills can work there too.
Okay, one more question. I think we have time for just one more quick one. In addition to the books that have been mentioned in the webinar, one of which is in progress, is there a book that you would recommend to deepen what is being explained in the webinar today?
Well, one of my favorite books in terms of what we just talked about is a book called Liminal Thinking. It's one of my favorite books. It's great in terms of getting everybody to kind of expand and improve the kind of their logic of solution-oriented thinking. And what's great about it is it gives very specific exercises that you can use as part of your training programs. And so I would definitely check that out. It's called Liminal Thinking.
Yeah, and just so you know, I just picked it up, and I couldn't agree with Lauren more on that. What I'm going to do is point you to Iris Bonet's book, and I'm looking it up because I don't want to mangle it, but her book is What Works, and it was published in 2012. And the full title is What Works? Gender Equality by Design. And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it anywhere where you can find a book. But she has some very good suggestions on that. And in fact, she comes out of the behavioral science world. So if you think about, you know, Sonnenstein and Thaler, who brought us nudges, she is in that vein and really hones in on what we can do, and some of the things are counterintuitive, but the things that we can do to improve women's experiences in the workplace.
And that book, Liminal Thinking, is by Dave Gray, and that's Gray.
All right, everyone. I wanted to say, first of all, Renetta and Lauren, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks to the 4A's Chief Talent Officer Council, who has made this webinar possible with all of their thought leadership and the contributions that they've made to programming this webinar. We thank you. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today and for all of your great participation and questions. Hope everyone has a fantastic day, and look forward to seeing you at one of our future webinars in this series, which will help round out all of the content that you've received today. Thanks, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Bye.